It was 1:30 in the morning when Big Mama called, her voice shaking like I ain't never heard. "Baby, don't go home. Stay right where you at." Before I could ask why, I heard sirens screaming through the phone. Then she whispered the words that stopped my heart cold. "He been waiting for you, baby. He been in your house for 4 hours." That's when I realized my grandmother's gift had just saved my life from a man I never saw coming. I sat frozen in my car outside the 24-hour Walgreens on 63rd and King Drive, still wearing my scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion from a 15-hour shift at University of Chicago Medical Center. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned ashy against my mahogany skin. Big Mama's voice was cracking on the other end, not with old age but with pure terror. And that woman had survived the Chicago riots, raised 6 children through the crack epidemic, and buried 2 husbands without shedding a public tear. "Big Mama, what you talking about? How you know somebody in my apartment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though my stomach was twisting into knots. She took a sharp breath that I could hear whistling through her dentures. "Baby, I woke up about an hour ago drenched in sweat. Had a dream about you walking through your door, and I seen a shadow move behind you. I felt it in my spirit, Nia. Called your neighbor Miss Patricia and she went outside to look. Said she seen a man slip through your back window round 10:30 tonight." My chest tightened. Miss Patricia was the type to mind her business, unless something was seriously wrong, the type who kept her blinds cracked just enough to see the block, but never got involved in drama. Why she ain't call the police? I heard Big Mama suck her teeth, that sharp sound of annoyance that every black grandmother perfects. "Child," she tried. "Called 911, and they said they'd send somebody when they could. You know how CPD do when it's the South Side. So she called me instead 'cause she know I'd get to you faster than them." I looked up at my rearview mirror and saw my own reflection, box braids pulled back into a bun, my mother's face staring back at me with those same tired eyes she had when she worked doubles at the post office. I had 2 choices sitting in that Walgreens parking lot with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a group of young brothers posted up by the entrance giving my car the usual once-over. I could trust Big Mama's feelings, the same ones I'd been dismissing my whole adult life as old-school superstition that belonged in Sunday morning testimonials, not real life. Or I could drive the 8 blocks to my apartment on South King Drive, walk through my own door like a grown woman who paid her own bills and didn't need protecting, and prove to myself that science and logic trumped grandmother intuition every single time. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother Marcus. "Big Mama blowing up my phone saying you in danger. Where you at?" I started the engine. The heat blasted stale air that smelled like the fries I'd eaten on my break 6 hours ago. My mind was racing, calculating the odds. Big Mama was 78 years old, spent most of her days watching Investigation Discovery, and calling me about every missing person case that looked remotely like me. Just last month she swore she had a vision about me getting carjacked at the gas station, and made me promise to only fill up during daylight hours. Nothing happened. The month before that, she insisted I shouldn't go on a date with this brother from Inglewood because she felt something off about him. Turned out he was perfectly nice, just boring. But then I remembered the one time I didn't listen. I was 16, about to ride with my friend Keisha to a party in Inglewood. Big Mama called right as we were leaving, told me don't get in that car. I laughed it off, said she was being paranoid. Keisha's boyfriend was driving drunk and wrapped that car around a pole on Halstead. Keisha spent 2 months in the hospital. I would have been in the passenger seat. I put the car in drive and headed toward my apartment anyway, my foot pressing the gas like I was trying to prove a point to myself. Big Mama's voice cut through the Bluetooth speakers. "Nia Michelle Johnson, you better not be driving toward that apartment right now." She only used my full government name when she was serious. "I'm just gonna drive by, see if anything looks off," I said, knowing full well that was a lie. I was going inside. I was tired, my feet hurt, and I had to be back at the hospital in 13 hours for another shift. The streetlights on King Drive flickered as I passed the Harold Washington Cultural Center, its windows dark and quiet. My neighborhood looked exactly how it always did at 1:30 in the morning. A few corner stores still lit up, a group of old heads sitting on folding chairs outside the barbershop talking noise, a couple walking their dog. Nothing sinister. Nothing that screamed danger. I was 3 blocks away when I saw them. Red and blue lights painting the brick buildings in flashing colors. Squad cars lined up outside my apartment building like it was a crime scene, and I realized with a sickening drop in my stomach that Big Mama had already called the police herself. I pulled over half a block away from my building, my hands shaking so bad I could barely put the car in park. Big Mama was still on the phone, her breathing heavy like she'd been praying out loud. "They there, baby?" she asked, and I could hear gospel music playing low in her background, the Winans or somebody singing about protection. "Yeah, they here," I whispered, watching as two officers walked up the front steps of my building with their hands resting on their holsters. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, neighbors in their house shoes and bonnets, standing around like they always did when the police showed up, phones out recording everything. I recognized Mrs. Thompson from the second floor holding her Yorkie, and the twins from upstairs still wearing their Jewelosco work uniforms. My stomach churned. This was my home, the place I'd worked so hard to afford after getting my nursing license, the first apartment I'd ever rented by myself without roommates or family help. Now it was surrounded by police and I couldn't even go inside. I got out of the car and started walking toward the building, my legs moving before my brain could stop them. Big Mama's voice crackled through my AirPods. "Don't you dare go up there, Nia. Stay where the police can see you but don't go inside." I stopped on the sidewalk next to Miss Patricia, who was wrapped in her robe with her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at me with those knowing eyes, the kind older black women have when they've seen too much. "Baby, I tried to tell you about that man," she said quietly. "I seen him 3 times this past week, hanging around the alley watching your window. Thought maybe he was with you, but something about the way he moved didn't sit right in my spirit." My throat tightened. "Why you ain't say nothing sooner?" She shook her head. "Chilly, I minded my business. Folks don't like when you all in they affairs. But when I seen him climbing through your window tonight with them gloves on, I knew. Called your Big Mama straight away 'cause I know y'all close." I felt sick. For hours. He'd been inside my apartment for 4 hours, walking through my rooms, touching my things, waiting for me to come home from my shift like he knew my schedule. One of the officers came down the steps and walked straight toward me. He was a young brother, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes that suggested he'd worked the South Side long enough to be jaded. "You Nia Johnson?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere in my chest. "We got a call about a possible intruder. Your neighbor reported seeing a male subject enter through your rear window round 10:30. When we arrived, we found the back window jimmied open. We cleared the apartment but whoever was there is gone now. Left through the fire escape when he probably heard our sirens." "Gone," I repeated, and suddenly the fear turned into something else. Anger. Hot and sharp. "So he just out here somewhere?" The officer's face remained neutral. "We're checking the area but he had a head start. I need you to come inside and see if anything's missing or disturbed. Don't touch anything until we process the scene." I followed him up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Big Mama was praying through my AirPods now, speaking in tongues the way she did when the Spirit hit her during church service. When I walked into my apartment, everything looked normal at first. My couch was still against the wall, my TV mounted where I left it, my kitchen clean because I never had time to cook and make a mess. But then I saw it. My bedroom door was open when I always kept it closed. The officer gestured for me to look but not enter. I stood in the doorway and felt my knees go weak. My dresser drawers were open, clothes pulled out and examined. My closet door was ajar, hangers pushed aside like someone had been searching for something. And on my bed, laid out in a neat row, were 4 Polaroid pictures of me. Pictures I'd never seen before. Me walking into the hospital for my shift. Me getting gas at the BP on Cottage Grove. Me carrying groceries from the Marianos on 59th. Me sitting in my car outside Big Mama's house in Chatham. Someone had been following me, documenting my life, and I'd never noticed. Never felt eyes on me. Never saw the danger. The officer stepped beside me, his jaw tight. "Miss Johnson, this isn't a burglary. This is something else. We need to get a detective down here." I backed away from the bedroom, my hands covering my mouth because I thought I might throw up. Big Mama's voice cut through my panic. "Nia, baby, breathe. You alive because you listened. That's all that matters right now." But it wasn't all that mattered. Because somewhere out there, a man who knew my routines, who'd been inside my home, who'd touched my things and left me photographs like trophies, was still walking free. And I had no idea who he was or why he'd chosen me. The detective showed up 45 minutes later, a sister in her 50s with salt and pepper locks pulled back into a ponytail and eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of evil Chicago had to offer. Her name was Detective Harris, and she moved through my apartment like she was reading a story written in the objects someone else had touched. She photographed the Polaroids, dusted for prints, and asked me questions I didn't have answers to. Any ex-boyfriends with grudges? Anyone at work acting strange? Patients who might have fixated on you? I shook my head to all of it, my mind blank with shock. I'd been so careful my whole life. Never posted my address on social media. Never brought strangers to my apartment. Kept my work life and personal life separate. But somehow this man had found me anyway, had learned my patterns, had made me his obsession. Detective Harris held up one of the Polaroids, the one of me outside Big Mama's house. This was taken in Chatham, right? Near 92nd and Cottage Grove? I nodded, my stomach dropping even further. That's my grandmother's house. I go there every Sunday for dinner. Her expression darkened. So he knows your family routines too. This is organized, patient. We're not dealing with a random creep. This is someone who's been planning. She pulled out her tablet and scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward me. We got footage from your building's front camera. I need you to look at this and tell me if you recognize him. The video showed a man in a dark hoodie and jeans walking through the front door of my building 3 weeks ago, moving casual like he belonged there, like he was visiting someone. The camera caught his face for just 2 seconds when he looked up at the lens. My blood went cold. I knew that face. That's David Morrison, I whispered, my voice barely working. He was a patient at the hospital about 4 months ago. Came in during a mental health crisis, aggressive, paranoid. We had to sedate him and put him on a 72-hour hold. Detective Harris leaned forward. And you treated him? Yeah, I was his intake nurse. He kept saying someone was trying to kill him, that the government was watching him. We stabilized him, got him on medication, and he was released to outpatient care. I remembered him now, how he'd stared at me during his intake, how he'd asked my name 3 times even though I was wearing my badge, how he'd said I had kind eyes and that meant I was an angel sent to protect him. I'd brushed it off as drug-induced paranoia, written my notes, and moved on to the next patient because that's what you do when you work 15-hour shifts in a Chicago ER. You can't carry every broken person with you. Detective Harris was already making calls, running his name through the system. Within minutes she had his history pulled up. Multiple psychiatric holds, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend in Naperville, and a recent arrest for trespassing that got dropped because of his mental health status. He's got an address listed in Englewood, but it's his mother's house and she reported him missing 2 months ago, Detective Harris said. Looks like he stopped taking his meds and fell off the grid. You became his new fixation. The words hit me like a punch. This was my fault. I'd been kind to him, done my job, tried to make him feel safe during his crisis, and somehow that kindness had twisted in his mind into something else. Something dangerous. I thought about all the times I'd walked to my car alone after night shifts, how I'd brushed off that prickly feeling on the back of my neck as exhaustion, how I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid when I thought I saw the same car parked outside the hospital 3 days in a row. My instincts had been screaming and I'd silenced them with logic. Big Mama had been right all along. Detective Harris put a hand on my shoulder. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? This is on him, not you. We're going to find him. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Chicago was a big city and David Morrison knew how to disappear. The photographs on my bed proved he was smart, organized, patient enough to watch me for months without getting caught. And now he knew the police were involved, which meant he'd either run or escalate. I couldn't stay in this apartment. Couldn't sleep in a bed he'd stood over, couldn't walk through rooms he'd touched. Detective Harris arranged for a patrol car to sit outside my building for the night, but we both knew that was temporary. The city didn't have resources to protect every woman with a stalker. I was just another case file, another statistic. I called Big Mama and told her I was coming to stay with her. She didn't say, "I told you so," or lecture me about not listening sooner. She just said, "Come on home, baby. I got your room ready." As I packed a bag with Detective Harris watching to make sure I didn't disturb evidence, I found something that made my heart stop. Under my pillow, folded neatly, was a note written on hospital stationery. It said, "Angel Nia, you saved me once. Now I'll save you from this cruel world. We'll be together soon. Your protector, D." He'd been in my bed, under my pillow, where I laid my head every night, completely unaware. I spent the next 2 weeks living in Big Mama's house in Chatham, sleeping in the same twin bed I'd used during summers as a child, surrounded by photographs of ancestors I'd never met but whose eyes seemed to watch over me from the walls. Big Mama didn't push me to talk about it, didn't demand I process my trauma on her timeline. She just made sure I ate, dragged me to Wednesday night Bible study, and sat with me in silence when the nightmares woke me up at 3 in the morning. The police had no leads. David Morrison had vanished like smoke, and Detective Harris called every few days with updates that meant nothing. They checked known associates, monitored his mother's house, flagged his ID in the system. But Chicago was full of places to hide if you knew where to look, and mentally ill black men who didn't want to be found usually weren't. I couldn't go back to work. Couldn't walk through those hospital corridors knowing he might be waiting in their lobby. Another crisis that would put me right back in his line of sight. I took a leave of absence, the first time in 6 years I'd missed a shift that wasn't for my brother's graduation or a funeral. My supervisor understood, said take all the time I needed, but I could hear the unspoken concern in her voice. Nurses who leave don't always come back. One Sunday afternoon, Big Mama and I were sitting on her porch watching the block when she finally spoke about the night she called me. "You know how I knew?" she asked, shelling peas into a metal bowl that had been in our family for 40 years. "You had a dream," I said, repeating what she'd told me. She shook her head. "It wasn't just a dream, baby. I woke up and I felt your mama standing at the foot of my bed, clear as day, like she was alive again." And she pointed toward the window and said, "Call Nia. Right now." I ain't question it. I just did what she told me. My throat tightened. My mother had died 7 years ago, suddenly, a brain aneurysm that took her before we could say goodbye. I'd spent those years convincing myself that death was final, that there was no spiritual realm, no ancestors watching over us, no divine intervention. Just science and coincidence and the stories we tell ourselves to feel less alone. But sitting there on Big Mama's porch, I couldn't deny what had happened. My mother's spirit or God, or whatever force Big Mama had tapped into that night, had saved my life. And I'd almost ignored it because it didn't fit into my logical worldview. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you," I whispered. Big Mama reached over and squeezed my hand, her palm rough from decades of work but warm with love. "Baby, you believed enough to listen when it mattered. That's all the ancestors needed." That night, Detective Harris called. They'd found David Morrison. A patrol officer spotted him sleeping in Grant Park near the Buckingham Fountain, still wearing the same clothes from the building camera footage, carrying a bag full of newspaper clippings about me he'd collected from the hospital's employee newsletter. He didn't resist arrest. Just kept asking if I was okay, if his angel was safe, if they'd tell me he was sorry for scaring me. He was back in psychiatric custody, this time with charges that would stick: breaking and entering, stalking, criminal trespass. The state's attorney assured me he wouldn't be released anytime soon, that he'd get the treatment he needed in a secure facility. I should have felt relief, should have felt safe. But all I felt was exhausted, hollowed out by the knowledge that my kindness, the very thing that made me good at my job, had painted a target on my back. 3 months later I went back to work, but I transferred to a different hospital on the north side where my face wasn't familiar. I installed cameras in my new apartment, changed my phone number, scrubbed my social media presence down to nothing. I started carrying pepper spray and taking different routes home every night. But the biggest change was internal. Every Sunday, I still went to Big Mama's house for dinner, but now I stayed afterward for the prayer circle she held in her living room with the other church mothers. I listened to their testimonies about dreams and visions and moments when God spoke through feelings they couldn't explain. I learned the names of my ancestors, studied the family tree Big Mama had been building for decades, understood that the gift she had wasn't magic or superstition. It was generations of black women learning to trust their intuition because that's what kept them alive through slavery, through Jim Crow, through poverty and violence and a world that tried to break them. That gift had been passed down through blood and now it was mine too. I started paying attention to the prickle on the back of my neck, the knot in my stomach when something felt wrong, the dreams that woke me up with urgent messages I couldn't quite remember. I stopped dismissing them as anxiety or paranoia. I called Big Mama every night before my shift, not because I had to, but because I wanted to hear her voice, to stay connected to the bloodline that had protected me when I didn't even know I needed protecting. And on the 1-year anniversary of that 1:30 a.m. phone call, I sat on Big Mama's porch with a plate of her greens and cornbread, watching the sun set over Chatham, and I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me my whole life. Love and intuition aren't separate from survival. They are survival. And sometimes the most logical thing you can do is trust the illogical feeling that whispers, stop, when your mind says go. Because that feeling, that gift, that voice that sounds like your grandmother or your mother or your own soul speaking truth, that's the thing that stands between you and the darkness waiting behind doors you almost walked through. If these words move something inside you, join the family. Hit subscribe and tell me your city in the comments. I want to see the map light up. You never know who's scrolling through these comments looking for a sign that they're going to be okay. And your voice could be that sign. We tell these stories to build a bridge for the next person to cross. Watch your back, trust your intuition, and never underestimate the weight of the decisions you make today. They matter more than you know. You with me?